The Cuyahoga County Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, June 18, 2018 will please come to order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Here. Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Shrine.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Here. We have a quorum. I'd also like the record to reflect that Councilwoman Baker and Council President Brady are also in attendance.
Great. Thanks very much for attending, everybody. Do we have anybody signed in for public comment?
No, no one has signed in.
Thank you very much. Item number 4 on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the May 21st meeting of this committee. Do we have a motion relative to those minutes?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilman Shan, seconded by Tuma, to approve the minutes for the May 21st meeting. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. Matters referred to the committee, one piece of legislation, Resolution 2018-0130.
Resolution number 2018-0130, authorizing an amendment to contract number CE 1700141-01 with Unified Solutions, Inc. for SAP Human Capital Management Support Services for the period July 1st, 2017 to June 30th, 2018, to extend the time period to December 31st, 2019, and for additional funds in the amount not to exceed $509,520.
Presenting on behalf of the administration, Janelle Green. Ms. Janelle.
Hi, good afternoon. The Unify Solutions, Inc. contract is an amendment to, again, extend the length of the contract to the end of 2019 and to add additional funding. This is to pay for contractors to perform the work in the areas of the day-to-day operations of the SAP support, which is a system that is the backbone of the payroll and benefits administration for the county. Also to supply support through open enrollment. Also, to work on data conversion into the ERP, which may include creating interfaces between the systems and archiving data that would not be imported into the ERP. Again, the majority of the funds will be from the IT index code, which will pay for the day-to-day maintenance. But there will be approximately $143,520 that would come from the ERP index code, which was budgeted at an amount of $249,000.
And this contract goes away when the ERP system is done, is that correct?
That is correct.
And as I understand it, the $509,520 is a not to exceed amount, and you only use it as needed. And if we don't need this through December 31st of 2019, we can end it early. Is that correct?
That's correct. Again, this is paying for contractors to perform the SAP work, which is a lot of coding and back end work. But we do those on an as needed basis. So if we don't need the work, we won't have them perform it. And again, it is a not to exceed. So if we were putting this amount in, so we won't have to come for amendments, hopefully, in the future. So we just wanted to have this amount in.
Any questions? Councilman Tron.
So we're writing code that's going to write to and transfer data to the new ERP system. Is that what's being written here? Is that what you're saying?
That's one of the pieces. That's an additional piece that's being added. So yes.
Okay, and that's being written by our vendor, or by internal folks, or by a third party?
By the vendor. This is a long-time vendor of ours. We've had consultants in the department for a number of years. So they will be writing the code, and it will be tested with our own internal staff as well, just to make sure the transition of data is where it needs to be, and also for the archiving of data that won't be imported into the ERP system.
But this vendor is affiliated with the ERP, or is this
No, this is a separate vendor that we've had with the county, from what I've seen, at least going back to 2012.
And the responsibility to make sure that the handoff is clean when we go live with our ERP system is going to be on whose
That will be within our internal staff.
Okay, but we're not writing the code, though. Somebody else is writing the code.
Right. Somebody else is writing the code, but our staff is verifying because we do have on staff 2 SAP coders that are on staff directly with the IT department.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I would note that Vice President Jones has joined the meeting, and we would need to pass this on second reading suspension in order to have it approved at the time of the start date. So I would ask if someone would make a motion for second reading suspension.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded to recommend favorably Resolution 2018-0130 to the full council for second reading suspension. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. It's so recommended. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Under discussion, we have 2 items, and the first item is a presentation by Director Catherine Tackett on the work of the Cuyahoga County Department of Innovation and Performance.
Hi, yes, Catherine Tkachuk, Chief Innovation and Performance Officer here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the work we do in the Office of Innovation. So we have 3 areas of focus. The first one being strategic decision-making, creating a culture of innovation, and improving processes. And our goal in the work we do is really about changing the culture across the county to focus on improving processes and outcomes. In the area of improving processes, we do a couple of different things. We do some work with our audit department, with departments that are undergoing an audit. We also have a Lean Six Sigma program that's been in place since 2016, and then some rapid improvement events that we've started doing recently. So the work that we do with the audit, we assist departments with ongoing audits. So this was something, the process that we put in place was just approved by the audit committee at the June 7th meeting. So I am serving as the executive office liaison with the internal auditor. So if they're having any issues getting responses or needing any help with anything, they come through me and I can assist them in making sure they're getting all of the support they need to complete their audits. We also put in place an escalation structure for any of the assistance that they're not, or anything that they need. If they're feeling like they're not getting a response, they have that all put in place through this process. And then additionally, I think most importantly, part of the role we're doing here is we are working with departments to immediately correct any issues that are found through the audit. So not waiting until the audit is finished. If there's an issue that's identified, we're there to help departments improve their processes, identify different policies and procedures that can be put in place. And we're doing that as the audit is ongoing, not necessarily waiting until the finish of it. So that's part of one of the main things that our office is doing right now. We're also doing work with the Lean Ohio grant. This was something we first received in 2016 and then received another grant in 2017. It was through the Lean Ohio program to provide Lean Six Sigma training to county employees. So we've done work we've trained 168 staff. We have a group that's finishing up right now, and 18 operational groups. One of those is actually county council. We had Khalil went through our training and just graduated back in May with his green belt. So we're going through different departments throughout the county and completing 21 different projects. And I think you'll have in your packet a document that shows the number of the different projects that we just went through. And I'm going to highlight 3 of them. These are projects that were just completed in our graduating class in May. And then we have a class that's going on right now, and we'll graduate in August with another 9 projects ongoing. And I'm going to highlight, for those of you that don't know, Lean Six Sigma is a process improvement methodology. It really focuses on improving value to the customers and reducing waste and unnecessary steps in processes. I'm going to highlight 3 of the projects that we've done just recently. So first was a project with our long-term care call center. So the reason for this project is we wanted to increase the call volume and first-time call resolution for folks when they're calling into the long-term call center on intake Medicaid applications for nursing facilities. So one of the things that, there's a number of different recommendations that came out, but one of them was we found one of the reasons that they weren't being able to have first-time resolution was they didn't have these bank statements, these bank look backs. They need 5 years look back at the bank if they're doing this to find out if there wasn't any transfer of assets in the last 5 years. So our staff went through, worked with the state of Ohio to come up with a form that would allow people to say, hey, if I don't have, I'm attesting to the fact that I did not transfer any of my assets in the last 5 years, and there's some internal checks we can make to confirm that, but they signed that form. And one of the things that's really important is we found that there were people who were having banks that were charging people $175 to $250 to get these 5-year look backs on these banks statements. So by implementing this new form that we got approved through the state of Ohio, we were able to save staff time of having to look through those processes, as well as save our applicants $175 to $250 per applicant. And this new form isn't put in place right now, and they're hoping that it will actually become a state standard across all of Ohio. Another project that I'm going to talk a little bit about is the SNAP Contact Center. So we wanted to increase the portion of SNAP applicants approved within 30 days for non-expedited applications and 7 days for expedited applications. And so they found there was a lot of different recommendations, and again, that's on the sheet that you have, a number of the different recommendations that they did to improve the client appointment process. That was one of their big areas of concern that they were having, where clients weren't able to have appointments that were convenient to them, and they were then not showing up, and all of the issues they had with that. And they tested it in February in the Quincy Neighborhood Family Service Center, and during that pilot period with their recommendations, they were actually able to meet 95% of applicants met state timeliness requirements, which is what the state requirement is during that pilot period. So they're working through to try and implement those across all the different neighborhood family service centers. And finally, the third one is I want to talk about was the termination of child support project. So child support currently handles between 8,000 and 10,000 termination cases per year, and they were having only about 6% of them within 20 days were getting processed. And they identified a number of issues, lack of parallel processing, a number of review steps, so actually 18 different review steps in their process, as well as 14 different handoffs. And handoffs, if you go through Lean Six Sigma methodology, lowering those is a big thing, because every time you hand something off, it can cause a delay as somebody waits for it, or it's also an opportunity for something to get lost. Either an email gets missed or a paper gets misplaced. So those are some of the things we work through identifying and trying to reduce during these Lean Six Sigma projects. And so they put in a number of different recommendations to streamline the whole process. And the result of that was over 2,000 hours of staff time that per year that was able to be reduced on this work. So that would be the equivalent of adding one additional FTE to that department. So they're able to do work and able to do the work of a whole nother FTE without having to add any more staff through that. So that's just a highlight of some of the projects. Like I said, we had more that we went through. We have 9 that are ongoing that'll finish up in August. And this is a type of work that we're trying to promote and support doing through the Office of Innovation. Another item, our strategic decision making, is actually our Cuyahoga performance system. So we have created a number of community indicators and government measures that are aligned with the strategic plan goals and priorities. And we are using 2018 to collect a baseline year data on these different measures. So we put them in place. We worked with the departments to identify those and put them in place, and they're right now collecting that data. And then we also included it within there a number of community indicator benchmarks. So not necessarily things we control fully as a county, but things that give a good benchmark as the health of our community. And so we're collecting all of that data as well. And we'll be collecting that through 2018 and then be able to report that out to the public. And we'll be using this Cuyahoga performance system as a management tool. It's also a way for us to start conversations. So if we're seeing trends that we're not liking, we can start talking about what can we do to fix those trends that are happening among some of these indicators. And then it's a platform for us to help celebrate success, identify those challenges, and initiate change. And then the last piece, which is a little bit more of a little bit amorphous area, is creating a culture of innovation. So what we're trying to do, again, is trying to make sure that people are starting to think as regular part, how can we improve our processes how can we try and be more innovative in the services we're providing and improve outcomes? So we've been doing this through a number of different things. We started up, we're trying to engage employees. We started up an innovation conversation series. Councilman Miller attended our first one that was in May, and that was talking a little bit about innovation. It was also sharing some tools with people, things that we do, some places where you can do best practice research. We did that for county employees, and then we'll host another one actually coming up in July at 5 different locations around the county, and it's going to be talking a little bit about improving communication between departments as well as our communication out to the public. So we're partnering with our communications department to present that series, and we'll continue to do these. They're lunch, 1-hour trainings over employees' lunch that they can voluntarily choose to attend. And it's just a great way for us to bring people together, start working together on some different projects, and really help identify where we can partner on key initiatives for county staff. So I think it's been really well received so far, and we're hoping to continue to grow that series. And then the last piece of it, wanted to touch base on, there's been some discussions about, right now, the Office of Innovation is a part of the Information Technology Department. And then there was some discussion, I think it was initially introduced in the 2016-2017 Council recommendation to create innovation as its own department. And so what it would do is codify the existence of this department in the county code. The legislation is ready for county council review, but wanted to just present that to you guys, hear your questions and feedback about this. It initially came up, like I said, in that 2016-2017 budget. When I came on, they asked to bring it forward, and so I wanted to just kind of present that to the committee and hear any feedback or input from that. Then finally, this slide just kind of shares a little bit about the budget that we have right now. So in 2018, our total budget is approximately just over $900,000, and we are projecting to spend about $822,000 of that in this year through the positions we have, as well as some contracts and projects that we're working on. And so then I am available for any questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. The legislation on creating the department, has that been introduced yet, or is it coming soon, or what's the status?
It has not been introduced yet. It was something that is in the works if it's something that council would be interested in seeing.
And questions by my colleagues? Ms. Simon? Okay.
So I had a couple of questions. The first one was with regards to this SNAP Contact Center. You said 95% of the applicants meet the state timeliness requirement, and you touched on a 30-day and 7-day window. What is the state's requirement? Are those the state's requirements?
Yes, those are the state requirements.
Okay. And I also understand your department issued an RFP for a broadband study. Could you talk a little bit about what you're doing with that and what you're hoping to accomplish with the RFP?
Mm-hmm. So that study, we know that over 30% of residents in Cuyahoga County do not have access to internet within the home. And that not having access to fixed internet within the home really hurts their ability to do things like job applications. So many of them are online nowadays, as well as students doing homework. There's just a lot of things that not having internet access in the home impacts. And so we are working and have worked with the Cleveland Foundation on a grant proposal to study what we can do and some of the best practices around the country on how we can increase broadband adoption throughout the community. And so that RFP would be to conduct that study that we're working with the Cleveland Foundation. So we'll be bringing forward shortly acceptance of a grant from the Cleveland Foundation to pay for 3/4 of that study, and then the innovation budget would be the rest. But it's really to do a survey of understanding, are there different things we could be doing as a county organization to try and increase that adoption of broadband within the home, or just internet access in the home. Mm-hmm.
Ms. Simon?
Thank you. And I think you've already answered part of the question I had, was with regard to the contracts that you have in place for 2018 that was part of your spend, current spend for 2018 budget actual. What contracts do you have out? And maybe one of them is having to do with broadband, or no, you're just...
Yes, so there are some that I think predated me. There was a project that predated me on Agenda Manager that's currently in place and was in place in 2017. That's part of the 2018 spend. There was a carry forward there. Additionally, we have a number of RFPs out to do some additional training with staff such as a project management training. So we're working on it right now. On that project, we had some funding set aside to match the grant for the RFP for the digital broadband. And then I'm blanking on something else right now.
Any, Councilman Tron?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Dr. Deming would be pleased to see it coming into this fruition out there. You identified 3 projects, I believe, in your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
What was the priority in picking those 3?
So those projects were identified as part of the grant application for the Lean Ohio program. That was part of what was in there. And we worked with the departments to select the projects that they thought were some of the highest priorities. So that was done working with those different departments to identify those priorities.
And what was the criteria that they used?
I don't know. I'll have to get back to you. That was before I was here, so I'll get back to you on that.
Well, then let's go to what would you use for criteria to go forward on future projects? Huh?
So I would use items like, for example, a risk level. So I think if we're talking, state, is there something where we're really not meeting standards or have any sort of option of sanctions or anything like that? That would be something that's a high risk level. So that would be a project that we would want to work on. I would also identify impacted populations. So if we identified that it impacted a large portion of the population or the customers we're serving, that would be another priority we would want to do. I also personally want to know that I have a strong champion and supporter of that. I think that's a key piece of the ability to implement the projects, those that have a strong champion and support of them. And then finally, I think I would also look at projects that we have control over the process, because it wants to be something that we can make changes to and we can actually implement the changes. If a lot of the results are going to be, well, we need to make federal law changes. Well, that limits the ability of implementing the recommendations. So it needs to be things that we have control over and can make those implementation changes.
I didn't hear dollars or time on your criteria. Are those factors that you're going to weigh in on lean projects going forward? Because that's historically where lean projects come out.
Yeah, so when I was thinking like the population impacted, it would be, so you want to do some of the ones that may be impacting a larger group, which may have more staff resources put towards them, dollars and time put towards those.
Okay, I'm thinking in terms of dollars or time as far as the gain side, not on the investment side.
Well, I think that's we can certainly, I don't like necessarily tying this specific dollar amount before I start a project that I would aim for this, but I think we definitely want to see the return on investment for the time that you're going to put into fixing the process, yes.
Yeah,
So we'd see those ones that we think we could have a large return on investment for changes that we would make.
Okay, and getting to return on investment, your budget is nearly $1 million. Mm-hmm. That, if you're using lean, you're going to look at somewhere between 3 to 5 times the gain. Are we projecting those kind of gains?
Right now, no. I think we're not there yet on being able to do that this year. I couldn't commit to that effectively and be straightforward with you. I think we're working towards where we should be gaining return on investments, but some of it is also looking at culture change, and some of it is also looking at, I want to make sure when we say savings, avoided costs. So for example, that can be something in the case of if it was, I think the example of the child support. I'm not necessarily recommending, even though they save the equivalent of a staff time, reducing that person, but we wouldn't have to add somebody to meet that effort. So if we can actually see the increase in the efficiencies of it, you don't necessarily need to add, if you don't have to add staff to meet state requirements or something like that.
Are we looking to at least break even?
I won't commit to that right now because I don't know that that's the case.
Okay.
That I can.
That would be.
I think that's
certainly something I'd like to build into any lean project. If it's supposed to be lean, it's supposed to be efficiency in producing and saving time and saving dollars. And if we're not even going to break even, it doesn't sound like a lean project to me.
I think that it's always the goal to be trying to be more efficient and do that. I'm just saying I don't know that I could commit to you right now that my office is going to save the equivalent of that in this year. So I think that's always a goal when we're looking at lean projects, and it's something that I have background doing, but I can't say at this time this year, I will have come to you by the end of the year with $1 million worth of savings, and I want to be straightforward on that.
I'll just follow up and say that I agree with Councilman Tron that cost savings potential needs to be an important consideration. And you shouldn't say that's not something I focus on, and that should be something you focus on.
I think it always is something I focus on. I didn't, if that's what I said, that wasn't my intention, just that I can't commit to a certain dollar amount right now.
Okay, well, I think right now the focus is important. You know, that you should be looking for projects where the county is, we're projecting something like a $30 million general fund shortfall for 2020, you know, because of, mostly because of Medicaid sales tax and a few other little things, you know, so anything we can do to narrow that gap, it should be a target. Ms. Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about your assisting the department with ongoing audits. How, I guess my first question is, when you talk about innovation and culture change and things like that, how does that play into your overall mission of trying to be more efficient? And I guess I'll just follow up with the question is, wouldn't any questions go directly to the director? And isn't that the director's obligation to answer those audit questions without having any assistance by anyone else to make sure those questions get answered?
So I think when we're talking the audits, one of the issues is a lot of times there are process issues. And so part of our role is to try and improve the processes. And I think that's where I see the tie-in of it is a process issue that we see. And so we can provide assistance with departments in improving those processes. The questions are already going straight to the director. We're there, again, when you have a lot of broken processes, sometimes just having the time to think about how can we do this better is something that's very hard for everybody to have time doing. And that's why having folks that are specifically aimed at that, that's where I think our office can help. But the questions they immediately go to the auditor. We're just there in case for any reason the audit's feeling they're not getting the response they need, then we can actually step in and help make sure that the process is as smooth as they can. And that's where our role is.
I may follow. How much time do you think you spend on this part of your office?
Well, I think it depends on the audits that are ongoing. Recently, it's been quite a bit of my time personally, but we do have a director of process improvement position that's going to be focused on this, and that will be their position. Right now we're in the process of hiring. Have a position posted.
So just to conclude, so your particular mission when asked on ongoing audits is not to say, hey, Director, you didn't get back to this audit about this particular question about why this is this way. You're there because they're looking for a better way to process.
Yes,
Is
that's
that
our
right?
main, yes, how to fix the issues that are happening and improve processes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Tron, round two.
Just following up, okay, so we identified audits, and that was an improvement in what we're going to do in the Lean Six Sigma area. How many steps were in the audit process at the time when you walked into it?
Well, there was an official process. So what,
I'm not surprised. Because that's usually one of the first things you find in a lean process, if there isn't a process.
right, and so we've put one in place where we can be of assistance to departments.
And how many steps in your concluding process did you implement that are identifiable?
I think there's 8 processes where we're working. I mean, we weren't trying to improve in terms of limit the number of steps. We're trying to improve responsiveness and improve the fixing of the processes as part of our work with the audit.
Okay, then let's go to a different measurement then. Time. What was the time to do the audit at the time you walked in versus the time to do the audit subsequent to your 8 process steps?
We were not trying to shorten, so the work we're doing with the audit was not a Lean Six Sigma project that we were trying to improve, to make the process more efficient in terms of we conducted a full Lean Six Sigma project. What we're doing with the audit is we're assisting departments that are going through audits, and so they still continue to go through audits with departments, and what we're doing is working with them to fix the issues that the audit has determined are there. So as the auditor is working through different, their work, and they identify different issues that are occurring, we're working with departments to fix those issues.
I guess I'm a little confused. I don't see that as a function of a lean project. If you said you went in without a lean project anticipation, then why isn't that just an audit function or an internal audit function? It just seems to me your whole scope of what you're saying, because it was one of the three examples of lean, and it's.
Well, no, it was one of the things under improving processes. So that one wasn't intended to, the audit work is not part of necessarily our Lean Six Sigma program. There may be Lean Six Sigma projects that are identified from the audits that we then look to implement, but it was one of the part of improving our processes. Our Lean Six Sigma program is a part of that, as well as the work we're doing with our audit team.
And what role, if any, are you playing in regards to the whole ERP analysis of the processes that are going on within every one of these areas? This is, to me, I love the idea of the lean coming into government. It belongs right directly as we're starting to write these processes under the new ERP system to do the best job to analyze how do we cut the 30 steps down to 15, or better yet, 5 or 8. Are you embedded into each one of these departments with looking at that? To me, that's where the dollars that our chairman is talking about, that we can see and find out there.
So I am not, our office is not fully engaged in that work. I think we've been doing some trainings with folks that are going through that work, so they actually have a background. Some of the staff, for example, procurement staff went through some of our Lean Six Sigma training, and then they're helping to do the brown bag mapping with the consultants that are going on to try and identify what those new processes are going to be in the system.
And I would think it would be terrific if you could go back and review what they did to verify that they actually applied the Lean Six Sigma steps that you gave them the instruction on, to see whether they actually took and leaned out the process, sped it up, saved us time, and ultimately, again, Chairman Miller, saved us money.
Ms. Baker?
Just a question on your budget. Of the 822,000 that's projected, what percent, where is that? Where's the biggest amount of money spent?
It would be on salaries and benefits.
And would you say 50% then is salaries and benefits, or
Yes, probably
about 50%?
possibly a little bit more. I think it's about, slightly over that.
If I may just follow up, the call center and the SNAP and the termination of child support, there are those in those agencies that are working and doing things every day. Is your suggestions being received well, and are you having any difficulties in coming in and saying, hey, this could be done better, and change is difficult?
Right, so in each of those projects, we had people from those departments on our project teams, and in fact, doing a lot of the, helping to come up with the suggestions. So we can help provide the tools and the skill sets, but we also want to work with those that are doing the work every day to understand it. I think, it's something that helps support the change and in fact, coming up with most of the ideas, we help provide the space for them to do that. And then can provide some best practices research and some other information, but they're on the project teams always.
Good to know. Thank you.
Okay, well, I appreciate the presentation. Just one piece of advice: think big, worm your way into big projects like the ERP. I know you can't make commitments, but be thinking in terms of big dollar savings and being a part of this whole county operation. Thank you for coming in, and good luck. We'll
Thank you.
check back with you in a time.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. My goal was to finish the first two parts in 30 minutes so that we could have a lot of time for ERP. I only missed by five minutes or so that's not bad. We're now into the main event of the afternoon, which is the monthly review of the ERP project with Zig Berzens too. We have major developments, and we're going to hear about them right now.
Good afternoon. Is it on? Oh, okay. Good afternoon. So we're here to talk about the project as of last week or two. As I've been doing, I try to start with the good news. I do think it's important that we talk about good news, and it's not all bad. There is good news. And so I think we need to remind ourselves that there is a major portion of this project that is moving along reasonably well, that it's meeting its targeted dates. People are starting to use the system, and so that part is quite positive. It does happen to be the area, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, that does not have a lot of automation to begin with. So it's very exciting for the folks that are using it. They're actually now starting to use tablets out in the field in terms of the sanitary engineers, and roads and bridges started today. So that's a good thing. I think the other piece of good news is that we've been talking a lot about the fact that there have been some segregated plans for the last few months, and that we now at least do have I'm referring to it as a consolidated plan, so that we do have the various components being brought together and they're being looked at holistically, which makes an awful lot of sense. It also means that you, as well as the Executive Steering Committee, is going to get and can get information that is just directly summarized out of the consolidated plan, so you're not restating things. And in essence, you end up with one version of the truth, which makes a tremendous amount of sense. I think the other piece of good news is that we do now have some benefits being defined. I'm showing you here the various benefit categories that the teams have identified. They make sense. It's no problem there at all. And I think it's important to recognize that we now can start looking at what I refer to as a payback concept model that I've shown here. I mean, this is a way of looking at how benefits get matched up against cost over time. And the whole idea, and I think you were talking about it earlier, I mean, does it pay for itself? And of course the answer is yes, it should. Absolutely it should. So the good news, again, if you look at this chart, it's only got the IT and the public works benefits. So they have put together their benefits and they've laid it out over the time. So we still have to have HR benefits and fiscal benefits. So those two are still to be done. But obviously, if you've only got the two that we've got, and we're showing a payback in 5 years after go live, that's pretty reasonable. So the way to look at this chart is to sit there and say to yourself, okay, one-time costs are quite a bit. That's your $25 million, and that's in the first couple of years. And so that's the line that's up there. But after that, costs don't really increase very much except for support and maintenance. And so that's why the line looks relatively flat. The only thing I've footnoted in there is you do need to recognize that somewhere along the line, you're going to have a major update. And that's probably going to be a nice jump up in cost. And so probably right after you get to the payback period is when you start talking about it doing an upgrade. And then you probably look at $5 to $6 million of some kind of major upgrade at that point in time. Now, the blue line down below is the growth in benefits. And as we talked before, it's going to take some time for the benefits to catch up. So we have to realize that. But once that happens, you will start seeing the growth in those benefits. And needless to say that as soon as we add HR and fiscal benefits, that blue line is going to move upward quite a bit more, which means that the payback period will shorten up. Okay? So that's the good news. The other piece of the good news is that, we've been talking about the fact that the team has said, we have some money set aside for backfill. Great, we should use the backfill money. And I think the team is starting to use the backfill money. The team is starting to bring in resources to help the project. Then you can see the list here is right. This is right out of their report that you saw about 10 days ago. I mean, this is in their report, although I've kind of hidden the names. And that's good news that they're doing it, but there's a caveat there, and that is that most of the resources in here other than the project managers that have been brought in, are technology folks. And so we really need to have some business folks brought in and allocated to the project, and that's the source of the funding for that. And that should be coming. So I want to talk a little bit about the May report. You've all gotten the May report, and I'm suggesting to you that the May report was somewhat of a fortune teller. So let's start with the chart that we see here, which is in essence all of the rollouts. And we talked about the fact that we needed to see the various rollouts. We needed to see when portions of the system are going to literally be turned on. And that's what this is. And at the far right end, at the right hand of every line you see on here is the targeted date when the system is supposed to be turned on, with one exception, and that is that there's a tendency for the team to add the post-production support month is tagged on at the back end. And so we need to be aware. And so you got to realize that there's some time that dribbles out beyond the actual go live date. So, but what's missing in this particular chart that I suggest that they should provide to you is that red arrow. That's where you should be today. That's where you should be today, whatever today happens to be. In their case, it should have been the end of May. Okay, and that really is not there. And the other thing that's missing is, where are you on those lines? Okay, and it would also make some sense to have that kind of information presented to you so you could very quickly look at a chart like this and determine, oh, something's behind, something is doing well, something isn't, and so forth. Another way that the May report is in essence a fortune teller for you is this particular line that I've bolded here. That was at the bottom of page 5. It said additional schedule changes are anticipated now that we understand the interrelatedness of the work streams and the remaining effort required to prepare for various testing stages, in other words, testing. So what does all that mean? What did all that mean? I think the team recognized at that time that they're really not going to start testing on 6/11, which is what the schedule said. I think that's something that came out just big time to me, that they already knew we weren't going to make it. And if you're not going to make testing, it starts affecting the rest of the project. The preliminary thinking is that at least another 4 weeks of time would be required. Okay? So that's pushing testing at least a month. And if you push testing for fiscal a month, you immediately push, can I bring something up on September 3rd? Okay? The entire fiscal workstream is affected and must be rescheduled. That's what I figured out looking at that report. Okay? And we also need to remind ourselves that in order to continue to actually start open enrollment as planned in October with the new system, you're going to have to make sure that you focus entirely on that and make sure that everything that has to be in place for open enrollment needs to be in place and can't stretch as happened with fiscal. Okay? So here's another line item that was in the May report, and there was a message here, and the message was, you can see some line items that are actually bolded, and then you see the little yellow arrows there. Well, the yellow arrows, using their terminology, say that most likely, they're going to have an impact on schedule, that particular line item that they're talking about is going to have an impact on schedule, and that impact certainly is not going to be do it sooner. So let's take another look at this overall rollout schedule. What I've done there is I've got some green check marks, and those are the line items that in essence are saying they're coming along fine, they're probably going to go live as planned. And those are all the public works pieces. So you see the 4 check marks, the 4 green check marks there, they'll probably be okay. The big red X says you're not going to bring in the first part of fiscal. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And that means that immediately you see the red arrows, things are going to be pushed. The question, of course, is going to be how far? Okay? The question will be how far. So in essence, all of fiscal is gonna get pushed, and it's gonna be combined probably. And then the other question becomes, you'll see some green arrows down there in the HR line item, that's the open enrollment, which has to go no matter what. It'll probably go. It'll probably go online as it should, per that plan. But everything else is probably gonna get pushed, and we don't know how far. I mean, I asked today, you know, is payroll still going to turn on at the end of the year? We still going to have checks the first week of January? And that seems to be the thinking today. All right? The concern that I have is that what are the critical path items that need to be in place before I turn on payroll? And the most important one is the time clocks, which is referred to as workforce management. That's the piece that has the time collection. And I'll show you a little message about that one in just a second. This is also, the next one is also taken from the May report, and it shows you the summary of where the project team stands financially. There's just two items I just wanted to highlight, and that is it looks to me like there's still some operating costs buried in these numbers, specifically in the whole area of ERP support, as to when do the IT people stop being developers and trying to bring the system in, and you turn the system on, and somehow the rest of their time should be part of their operating expenses. And that needs to be clarified. Admittedly, as soon as you start making changes to your target date of when you're going to turn the system on, it starts affecting that. Okay? The other thing that appears to me, and I've tried to show you here with this red line, is that the software numbers have gone down noticeably. So that's probably a reclassification of some software charges. After you go live, again, they should be operating, and that's probably what that is. So let's talk a little bit about readiness. Those are Boy Scouts. So just a quick definition of the whole idea. It's a state of preparedness, right? A state of preparedness. And the bottom line here is it appears as if the team was not ready to start testing, okay? This chart's taken from an earlier report, and basically its intent was to show you the methodology and the approach and the way things were going to be done in the project. So it was applied to all of the various components. So let's talk about the whole idea of the fiscal component, which is the one that testing was supposed to start last week. It didn't, okay? So what had to be in place? What had to be ready so you could start testing? So if you look at this, you start seeing, okay, some green check marks, I added those, that's history, that's finished. But you get to the build component, the purple one, and you see some line items in there. Technical development of reports, interfaces, conversions, extensions, all of the changes, if you will, to the system. The technical development needs to be done before you test. Same thing with data conversion. You've got to be able to prepare your material and your data to move it from A to B. Okay, those have to be done. They're in sequence. It has to happen. And I'm just reminding us who's responsible. The tech development is really a combined responsibility of Infor and county. The data conversion is a responsibility of the county, not Infor. I mean, the county's supposed to take care of it because it's the county's data. Right? Then if we get to the test component, as you go down this list vertically, one of the things that has to be done? Oh, the scripts have to be developed. These are the little procedures that someone's supposed to go through when they literally test the system. Well, I think I talked to you last time that there are approximately 350 scripts that are supposed to have been developed for fiscal. 350, round numbers. That's a lot. They weren't finished the week before 6/11. They weren't finished. Okay? And just to remind ourselves, yes, Info was supposed to finish the scripts, but the county has to literally execute the scripts, okay? And they've got to decide if it passes or it fails. I mean, so there's a lot of county resources are necessary right now. Right now, okay? The other piece that's going on, we need to recognize that there is another third party here. And I think that's a good thing. We've talked about that there is another third party that's externally looking at this, independently looking at this project. One of their statement of work line items is testing readiness. So I took the statements, slightly paraphrased, right out of their statement of work to remind everybody, this is what they're supposed to be doing. Okay? And last week, they did present to the Executive Steering Committee, and they definitely had some findings regarding the readiness of the county to do some testing. But they've had to suspend what they're doing because not testing. Okay? So the bottom line is we may have a lot of people involved, we may have a lot of people pushing forward and trying to get to the end result, but for fiscal right now, they're not ready. And there's a big wall up there that basically says you're not ready for testing because data conversions weren't finished, testing scripts were not finished, and the development of some of the various RICE items using an acronym is not finished as well. Now, are they working on it? Will it be ready? Presumably. So what's been the team's reaction? Clearly, the team does understand that it no longer can roll out part one of fiscal on September 3rd. I think the other component of this is the team definitely has been saying we need to do it right. And that's great. I think that's excellent that they're thinking that way because that means they're not going to try to shoehorn this solution in, which is what the reaction that some organizations certainly can make and say, let's make this date no matter what. And if you start doing that, you've got real problems. So that's a good thing. There's definitely some relief. I think some members of the team were feeling a lot of pressure. We're going to start testing. Here it comes. Here it comes. Well, now, of course, the real problem now is if they relax too much, they got to get wound up again. So we got that issue. And fortunately, I don't think anybody that I know of has overreacted. So let's just throw this whole thing out. I don't think any of that's going on. So what are the next steps? The team's clearly, and they are doing it right now, they are replanning the fiscal component of the system. They are replanning it. But they've also got to rebaseline the entire project. I mean, fiscal is a big piece. It starts affecting everything. So they've got to basically rebaseline the entire project. So they are restructuring the overall project components. 6 months ago, everybody talked about splitting fiscal and doing part of fiscal early and all that. And now they're really basically saying, okay, I think we're going to bring fiscal components together. It probably makes some sense. Definitely, they're going to leave work order alone. They're going to leave the whole public works piece alone. I mean, that's going to keep moving, and that's a good thing. Have to focus significantly on making sure that no matter what, the open enrollment component, the pieces of the benefits solution got to go up in October. So everything that's necessary to make that happen they have to focus on that, okay? And then we need to be real careful about this work order management. I mean, the workforce management, I have a typo here. It's workforce management, I apologize. Workforce management, which is timekeeping, that's got to be worked on. That's got to maintain pace, and it's got to meet the schedules in order to turn the system on at the end of December. So the team is continuing to move forward. That's a positive. They recognize they've got this issue, but they haven't stopped. So they're moving forward. They are currently, and I stopped in today, they're currently validating the approach, validating the system's approach, and that seems to be coming along reasonably well. But they're doing procurement, the procurement cycle. Okay? And then there needs to be a renewed emphasis on getting ready for integration testing. The other thing I think is happening is there's some conversation going on about should the team actually restructure the way they're doing integration testing, and I think that will come out of what they're doing right now in terms of validating the approach. All right? And then certainly they are talking about let's get some resources committed to this effort. All right. Now, how does all this look? And this is a chart that I generated for you a couple of months ago, I think. And I'm just trying to show you what the probable differences are, what the probable changes are. But mind you, they're probable. I indicate to you, though, that, so virtually everything gets pushed to the end of the year as far as fiscal is concerned. Okay? And that makes it a big bang. So down at the bottom, I added the number of rollouts, and I think the number down there is 7 during December. Okay? That's not a good month. But that's where it looks like the team is going in that direction. And then you've got a sort of a big bang number 2, where I think it says 6. Is that 5 or 6? I can't see it very well. But that's going to happen at the end of March. All right? Probably. I mean, the team is working on this plan. I know they're going to have preliminary discussions with the Executive Steering Committee Wednesday, and they are committed to coming up with their revised plan for the project the following Wednesday on the 27th, which means that all of that should be in the June report to the council. So I just wanted to mention that there are some complications that this rebaselining creates. I mean, that you need to pay attention to. There's a continuing lack of business personnel being committed full-time to the project. It's been that way from day one. It's continuing that way. Project management is going on by committee. We've got 3 project managers. It's very siloed. There's a continuing elongation of deliverable reviews and approvals. And Infor, of course, wants the approvals done in 30 seconds. They'd like to get paid. But we certainly don't need to wait weeks. I mean, there's no reason for that. There's confusion over the complete responsibility of time to pay process. I mean, this gets into the whole issue of, is HR responsible for all of the timekeeping and the payroll, or is fiscal responsible? And it keeps bouncing back and forth over the last month, as I can understand it. And maybe I don't, but that's what I'm hearing, is differences in responsibilities. Okay? Fiscal time pressures, I mean, this is a complexity, and we have to recognize that there's external audits going on virtually, and there's work associated with it practically all the time. And it tends to create a priority issue. And then there's also this Infor deliverables issue. Infor has so many deliverables, it's a nightmare. It would make some sense to combine some of these deliverables. I don't know why we need to have a $500 deliverable. It just strikes me as being a lot of overhead. So maybe we could do something like that. Some additional complications. We've got to recognize, and I'm sure everybody does, that during the holidays, folks have a tendency to take vacation. So there's a good, strong possibility that will create some issues in late November and throughout December. If we have to remind ourselves that if open enrollment goes up, as they're planning, that we are going to have to get the benefits information to the legacy system for a few months. It has to continue. That has to happen. We're definitely got to recognize some increases in project costs. I'm going to talk about that. But one of them for sure is, if you've got project managers who are only contracted for 6 months, that runs out. That runs out. And Infor project management also runs out. That runs out in November, according to their contract. Certainly, we got to mitigate the risks of time collection, and we need to make sure that we have that stuff ready. And I've said this, but I'm going to continue saying it. That's on the critical path. It's on the critical path. It has to, people have got to pay attention. I've already been told that there's a backup plan, which is, oh, let's keep using the Kronos clocks. Okay? Well, my reaction is let's pick one or the other. So we need to make sure that we resolve the fact that there continue to be difficulties in generating and resolving change orders. Some of these change orders just keep sitting around. We can't seem to get them worked out. We need to put that to bed, and we need to recognize, and I've already mentioned this, if you've got this big bang of a tremendous number of rollouts at any one time, we just have to know about it and pay attention to it and plan for it and schedule for it. With regard to change management, the team has got to pay more attention to communications. The team is paying a lot of attention to training, as they should. But this rescheduling is a big deal. I mean, there are a lot of personal schedules that are going to be impacted by this. People who were already planning on, gee, I'm going to cancel my vacation so I can be here the first week of September. If that's the case, it's not necessary anymore. And so they need to be told. Otherwise, surprises, nobody likes surprises. We'll talk a little bit about tracking project progress. Infor puts out a weekly report. I have shown you this chart, which sort of shows you the trend of the Infor reports on a weekly basis. But again, there are some messages here. This is 1 week before you're supposed to start testing. 1 week before you're supposed to start testing, and the arrows for fiscal are downward. That sort of tells me something. Okay? And of course, for the first time since I've been looking at these Infor weekly reports, for the first time I saw one that's red. And which one is red? Workforce management. Okay, so they're having trouble getting that started, all right? Because it's supposed to have been started, I don't remember the exact date, but maybe last week or something like that. But the point is that they're not starting until the week after this. I think next week is when their consultant is supposed to come into town. Starting that late is concerning, right? They themselves say it's red. Project spending, this I've shown you this is the trend. This is showing you the monthly results in terms of what the planned spending is per month throughout the year, and then what the actual spending has been by month throughout the year. Well, if you take a look at last month, we're supposed to be spending according to the blue line, and we underspent. Now, if we realize that spending is tied to Infor deliverables, that means that Infor deliverables did not get approved, and I didn't spend as much. So it's a harbinger that we're going to have problems. And it's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. So what effect, if we're going to have this sort of replanning and rebaselining going on, what effect will that have on the budget? And I assume you have an interest in that. So we need to be aware that Infor has presented a change order for compensation, additional compensation, due to all the increased efforts that they've had to go through because of county delays. And that's been in play for a while now. And that's a sizable number, 6 digits. Infor will definitely need to issue a change order for the increased project management as soon as you start pushing all this work into 2019. Their contract says we stop project management on November. You're going to have additional time, and they have a fixed fee for project management, which is $32,900. That's in the statement of work. Okay? Infor will need to issue a change order for the additional effort necessary to account for the various shifts in interfaces, connections, and temporary solutions to accommodate the rebaselining. I don't have a number other than an estimate that I can make based on all the other numbers that I've seen. I have asked, generally, they're basically saying they're not ready to give that number because everybody needs to see the final plan. Okay? Mainsail is the organization that's providing some staff augmentation. Remember that list in the very beginning? We talked about the project managers and some of the developers and so forth. Mainsail is the organization that's doing that through Infor. Well, the contracts of those project managers are 6-month contracts. If they started in April, they're going to run out October, November. So they need to be change ordered. Okay? The total contract amount the Mainsail has, I think, is right at $560,000. You know, my bet is you're probably going to see just, again, that much more money because it gets to be longer. Okay? Mainsail will need to provide additional contract business resources. As I've said, I think that there need to be additional business resources brought in as quickly as you possibly can to focus on getting these things ready for testing and to actually conduct the testing and the validations that needs to go on. Since, you know, since their listing of about 6 people was 500-some thousand, if you need another 6 people, I'm figuring it's going to be another 500,000 for 6 months. That's how I got that number. And extending the schedule will require some increases. I guess I'm being self-serving here, but I'm assuming you might want me to stick around. So if you want me to stick around, it'll probably cost a little bit more because my contract will run out sometime very early 2019. And I just found out that my assumption that RSM's contract was shorter was not true. They're actually supposed to be here through the end of 2019, so probably don't need to have an increase in theirs. So what does that look like when you take a look at that page that we had earlier, which said, here's the summary of from the May 30th report, where do I see the net changes? You go through all this and you look at this and you see some net changes which increase this, decrease this. The bottom line is it appears to me that you probably can continue this even with the extension through 3/31 and maybe even 4/30 and still stay within the $25 million authorization. So this is kind of what the impacts are. So the increases in Mainsail resourcing will probably overdrive your 1.5 million for backfill, as much as $500,000. Increases in the Infor contract will probably be in the 10 to 20% range, so they're at 975. So it'd be in about $1 million, give or take. RSM contract, excuse me. Where's page up? There we go. And then I definitely think that it would be very helpful if the team would generate a bottoms-up roll-up of their budget, so that, you know, just simply say, this is where we're going to spend our money, and just start at the bottom and keep adding everything up, rather than keep focusing on that delta of the contingency. So some observations. The options, there are options facing the team, and they're going through these options right now as part of their rebaselining. So I think there are some givens, and I think we need to repeat those. Public Works should continue no matter what. The rollout of open enrollment should definitely continue to be targeted. You kind of have to, this is an Infor term, you decouple the remaining major components. Means don't be hung up on trying to make sure you have fiscal in place before you do HR. So that's been a conversation piece, and so we need to split that on, basically give up on that one and say, it's okay. You know, go with benefits first for open enrollment purposes, and then bring fiscal in probably at the end of the year. And so that's what I basically said. You defer the fiscal components to a convenient time. Right now, it's looking like it's going to be the end of the year, but if it isn't, it'll probably be 3/31. Okay? Now, the other option that has been brought up by several people is, what about going to, if you're going to do a delay, what about going to version 11 of Infor's financial component? So I thought maybe we ought to talk about that a little bit. The first thing we need to recognize is that there are some perceived shortcomings of version 11. People in the fiscal department have already looked at it. And basically what all it's saying is that if there are changes that we have to make to the current system, to the current version, we probably would have to make the same changes to version 11. So the fiscal folks are thinking that you don't gain much, okay? The thing we should remember, I mean, you gain some technology things because in essence, they're going to, Infor has taken the Lawson system and has basically moved it to the cloud. That's what version 11 is. The other piece that is nice is that it has its own document management solution. So that takes us back to our document management conversations of several months ago. But it's, and we must remember, you've already got version 11 throughout the entire solution with the exception of the financial piece, the Lawson piece. That's the one that's not version 11. Okay? And round numbers, this is big round number estimates, 6 months, $1 million to 3 million of Infor charges to do that, okay? So if you decide to do that, I mean, you're really literally saying we're going to do a pause to this project, push fiscal out 6 months. Probably can still go forward with HR, but you push fiscal out, which means that makes you go down the path of maybe we don't do fiscal until the end of 2019. But you also have then a financial impact here that pushes you over 25 million. Bottom line, a majority of the current implementation is already version 11. It's going to require you an awful lot of time, and it's going to push you over 25 million. So, and then we need to and then you probably need to be thinking, okay, we can go to version 11 for fiscal, but we can wait until 2020. So some recommended considerations. The council should expect the administration to provide a complete revised plan, schedule, and budget by month through the end of the last project rollout as part of the June report. So you should have some expectations in their June report. Okay? And presumably it should have that. Council should expect a recap of the independent third-party assurance contractor's assessment of the county's readiness to initiate testing. Big piece, big item. The county has already shown that didn't make fiscal testing start on 6/11. So now we need to say, okay, let's be sure if we're going to look at it another time. And the timeframes now get tighter and tighter. I mean, HR, if you want benefits to go up and open enrollment to go up, they're now talking August 1 testing start. So it used to be mid-July, now it's August 1. So there's not a lot of time left after that. Council should expect a summary of critical path items for each major rollout, particularly the fiscal, open enrollment, and payroll timekeeping work streams, with a focus on a punch list approach. This is what's got to be done, and here's where we stand with each line item. And so, as an example, the HR system can't really operate unless it has a complete, proper, accurate employee master file. I mean, it's got to have all the employees. That's a punch list item, not something that generically says, oh, we're working on data conversion and we're 75% complete. There's 10 line items there, and one of them says employee master. Where am I on that one, and when will it get done? It's crucial. I don't know what else to say. So from a conclusion perspective, of course you should continue the project. And we just need to remind ourselves that there are some caveats. So the project will successfully conclude if the county allocates the requisite business personnel full-time to the project. I can't emphasize that enough. Full-time commitment of selected people, whether they're contract or employees, on the project. And then next line item says they need to be empowered. They need to be able to make the call when you get into some of these little detailed questions. I mean, we should not take time to roll that all the way up to a chief and then roll it all the way back down. The county needs to formally and officially freeze its business process requirements and stop all this nice to have, what about, whatever the requirements are, say those are the requirements, and then move on. Okay? The county has said several times that I have seen that, oh, we'll change our processes to meet the system. Well, the trap, of course, is that people who use the system have a tendency to make it look, they want to make it look like it's always looked and the way it's looked before. And what does that do? That puts changes on the system. What does that do? That gets you in a system that 5 years from now, nobody wants to maintain anymore. Just can't afford to fall in that trap. The county needs to adhere to a disciplined weekly approach to planning, scheduling, tasking, and tracking the project activities, contract, internal IT, and business staff. Again, if the business staff are assigned full-time to the project, then the business staff need to be managed and they need to have tasks and they need to commit to their deliverables just like the contractors do. The county holistically manages a project rather than by committee and siloed responsibilities, and we've talked about that quite a few times. In terms of the project spend, the baseline of the project will most likely stretch work effort into 2019, and it will require some increase in spending. However, I'm not suggesting it requires increased spending beyond 25 million. I'm simply saying that the various individual contracts that you've got there will probably need to be change ordered upward. Okay? And on that note, I'm open for questions.
Well, you've been thorough and complete as usual, for which we're appreciative. And this raises a lot of serious questions. We saw both the delay in testing, and we also saw that they gave us some very preliminary information on benefits, but nothing like the complete report that they were earlier saying we would get in the May report. So that's a factor as well. Questions from my colleagues? Well, in not seeing anything immediate, I'm going to jump in. And I know that in the past you have advocated that there be one single person that has overall project management responsibility. Where are we on that?
Well, several things have happened which are positives, and that is that the county, the administration has identified and has obtained 2 contract project managers to focus on 2 of the work streams, and then they've allotted or assigned, in essence, the third work stream to an internal project manager. Those are good things. Because the teams were not focused from a leadership perspective, and that made a lot of sense. But once that has happened, then we still seem to have this void at the very top in terms of pulling and coordinating and managing everything holistically, as I view it. Now, I've been told that one of those contract managers in terms of interview time I've spent with that individual, certainly has a skill level that would suggest that he could be that individual, and that there is a possibility that he might actually be, if you will, promoted in a fashion to become the sole project manager, which would probably be a good move. That does not mean that they should then avoid having an individual paying attention to the details of that work stream, but certainly there needs to be someone who is putting in full-time, orchestrating and having all the strings, being able to look at that overall consolidated project plan and look at the various components and the piece parts and how they fit together, because that is happening, that needs to go on, there's no question about it.
And another thing that you've brought up previously is you talked again about this critical path business, and you've said that for each item on the critical path, we have to identify what the resources are in terms of personnel, time, and other resources necessary to make sure that those things happen, and to identify those and make sure they're in place. And my question is how well are we doing at getting that information put together?
Well, I know the team is working diligently on the rebaselining, that they are putting quite a bit of effort into adding detailed tasks to the work plan, as they should. The question becomes, at what point, and are they going to literally attach to that detailed tasks the various resources that are necessary? And an effort was made about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, and it's not complete. It was made with an approach of asking the owners of the resources for those resources, and so it wasn't really as complete as could be. And so there are still some things that are left uncertain, which can be resolved. It also means that there needs to be a focus on the folks who are literally working on the plan to take an approach of what is the work that's necessary to be done rather than what is the scheduled time necessary to be done. Means because Infor started this plan based on deliverables and target dates, they're not concerned at all with how many hours and what the resource efforts are. They just assign names, okay? Because somebody gets paid for the deliverable and they're happy. I think it needs to be a little more focused on the actual resource hours for the county side, for the business people, so that they can literally say, I've got to have 22 hours for this particular test. They ought to be able to do that. Okay, they ought to be able to do that, as opposed to, well, we just need a list of 35 people and we just need you available to sit there. And I'm drawing an extreme, to make a point. But it seems to me that can be done. I don't know if it's going to happen.
Okay, well, I would like to convey a few things to Earl and Matt, representing the administration here, and I appreciate your being with us today to hear the message. The first is that I'm extremely concerned about the delay in the systems testing. I'm extremely concerned about that, and not because it in itself derails the project, because it does not, but it represents a failure of accountability. We did not have the necessary anticipation to put together what needed to be done, who needed to do it, how long it would take, and
and how we would get these things programmed to be done in order so that we could start as scheduled. And going forward, it's only going to become more difficult as we have more rollouts and more complexity. And I think it's just absolutely critical that this accountability piece be put in place. I'd like to lay out the things that I'm looking forward to see in the June report that we're going to get early in July, and that we're going to discuss at the next quarterly update that's going to take place in mid-July. And I think the page 36 of the Z report, council considerations, lays out most of it. Number one, that we get a complete revised plan, and that number two, the critical path elements required for all of this to happen be laid out, and number three, I'm going to add that the resources and the people and the time commitments required for each of these items to happen, that they be identified and scheduled, and that we see that in the report. And fourth, the last item on the ZIG list, that we get a report on the third-party assurance assessment of the HR work stream, which is expected to take place in July. And the final item I would add is that I'd like to know what the plan is as to whether we're going to have a single person as project manager who's going to oversee the entire project in terms of the accountability for the timing of the implementation. And what my request is that by the end of this week, I would like to know whether each of those 5 things that I've requested to be in the next report, whether they in fact can and will be in the next report, or whether there's things that you don't think you can do. So that's my request. Councilman Tron.
Seeing how you've already made the 30,000 request, I'm going to go back to some of the specifics that your red arrows on reflecting scheduled changes, which indicated that you're of the belief, at least based on the way the slide is written, that those schedule changes are going to slide in the 2 major areas of fiscal and HR rollout.
Yes, sir.
That always, and I think your conclusions are that will ultimately result in dollars, more than likely.
Yes.
Okay. Just to pull on your conversation about version 11 of the fiscal, if you're pushing it beyond March, that means, in my mind, April, May, something beyond that is beyond that. And you indicated that version 11 of the fiscal would then be a potentially November, December launch if you did that. Wouldn't it make sense to, at least if you're going to do that, to adopt because of some of the features and functions already built into it? If that red arrow is going to push us April, May, June, why not go ahead and adopt the current? Because that usually results in less cost in maintenance software, because you've already adopted the most recent current version. You're not trying to maintain an old version of it. You're not trying to maintain one that doesn't have the data, the documentation that we're looking for. Wouldn't it make sense to bite that bullet now versus waiting?
I guess.
We're gonna get there anyway, I assume.
Yeah, sure. Ultimately, you will. There's no question about it. I think a lot of it has to do, well, there are quite a few reasons. So, one, it's gonna cost you, it's gonna push you over 25 million. I mean, you're gonna end up changing your budget authorization. So, at least in my opinion. I mean, because it's gonna be more sizable. Because in concept, it sounds simple. Because there's a tremendous amount of intertwining and linking that Infor has created between this older Lawson piece and all this newer piece. I mean, it's all, there's gonna be a lot more work that Infor is gonna have to do, which is why they're talking, could be as much as, several $1 million, okay? And so it's definitely gonna create more work. There's no question that Infor would love to sell you more. I mean, we all know that the vendor is gonna do that. But you also have issues with regard to the project team, whether or not you can maintain momentum, whether or not you can keep people excited. Because in essence, you're gonna have to start over. I mean, all of that brown paper to be stuff, if you will, that was done 6 months ago, you're gonna redo it. And so all of a sudden, the folks who did that, they say, wait a minute, we're gonna do this again. You're gonna lose a lot of them. I think you're gonna lose a lot of focus, a lot of interest and all that sort of thing. Also, you're gonna lose the actual Infor consultants because you don't need them in the, as soon as you make that decision, we're not gonna do fiscal, then all of the current consultants are going to slide away. And they're gonna come back in and saying, well, we've got these new consultants and they're the ones that know version 11, and so you're gonna go with that. And of course, they're gonna say, well, I don't know the way you do things today. So that's gonna cause a problem. Then the other thing that I think could happen to you if you're not careful is that whole cash versus accrual question could come up again. And that decision took, what, a year?
We didn't even know it was being discussed in all candor.
Okay.
Let's,
But it was.
and nor did our fiscal officer, so let's.
But all I'm saying is, as soon as you open that door, there's that question is gonna probably pop up again. Because Infor is gonna say, our system is designed for accrual accounting, which is exactly right. And there's literally a change going on right now. One of those line items in here, one of those RICE items, workflow redesign or whatever, is being done to accommodate cash accounting. That's actually happening. I mean, so that would have to be redone, and anyway, so I guess what I'm saying is it's probably a good idea to not do that, wait until 2020, get this thing done.
But you're gonna pay those same costs in 2020, you're gonna redo it, and you're gonna be maintaining a cobbled together
The
piece.
difference would
Whatever,
be-
whatever you recommend is what I would like to go follow, but
Yeah.
it just seems like all we're doing is kicking the can down the road on that one.
Yeah, but if you kick it down far enough, it actually could pick up with the rest of version 11, which is by then maybe goes to 12. And then you're basically saying, I think as I said, you're gonna have a major update maybe in 5 or 6 years. Then that's where you do version 12. I don't know what their numbering scheme is or what they would do, but you would fold that in and do it at the same time. That might make more sense.
Okay, well, it just seemed like sometimes you bite the bullet and you adopt it, but if that's not your recommendation. Your team's next steps, in there you had rebaselining the entire project, and to Mr. Miller's point, as far as getting scheduling, can that be done dynamically so that as they make changes, it dynamically changes so we can see it as opposed to?
Of course it can, as long as.
Of course it can. I knew
Of course
this.
it can, as long as you
Yes.
put the dependencies and the critical path items in there.
Right.
If you put those in there, and I've already asked this question because I feel very strongly that the team needs to recognize that workforce management is a critical path item. It needs to precede, it needs to finish before you turn on the payroll. You have to have the clocks working in place, and people, when you start on December the 23rd with your new clocks, it's got to work.
And has the hardware been ordered?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have the hardware.
Yeah, the hardware is, the IT people do great with our hardware, okay?
Okay.
All right, so I mean, that stuff's gonna be fine. But it's the work rules. It's the work rules in 37 contracts. You're gonna interpret work rules. That's configuration. That's software work.
On your rollout schedule, still staying with that, what is your worst case drop dead date that the HR and all of the workforce could be done as the last possible date in your mind to still hit that December 23rd, punch your ticket in? If we get to that date,
Well, there's two
this
questions.
body ought to
Okay,
hear
there's-
and say,
There's two questions. One of them is open enrollment. Okay, so right now, the plan is for the benefits piece, which supports open enrollment, is going to roll out and be turned on at the end of September, which then sets up the system so that the HR department can do what it does with regard to my HR and, and announcing things and training people and sending out notices, and this is how you're gonna use this new thing. It gives them time because open enrollment is, I think, officially supposed to literally turn on in mid-October. I mean, it's when you send out the announcement to all the employees and say, guess what? You can change, you can change your status and you can, whatever you do in open enrollment, okay? So that means you just work backwards, all right? I mean, if you're talking about end of September, and right now, testing is targeted to start August 1. You have exactly 30 days for integration testing, user acceptance testing, and then all the production cutover activities that you need to do. I would suggest to you, you don't have much slack, if any, in that. If any, which means that the drop dead date is probably August 1. Got to start testing on August 1. And then you need to be able to say, if I'm going to spend 2 weeks on the integration system testing, then I need to have those full-time people we talked about, and they better be in that room, and they better be pounding away on those scripts. And hopefully, by then, we have figured out that we don't need 350 scripts. I'm just making that number up because that's what Fiscal had. But HR is going to have a lot of scripts too. And you sure don't need that many. Because you should be, integration testing, you should be testing the process, not the transaction.
so August 1st should be a date we have circled on our calendar.
Big time.
Big time for this entire body, because that's gonna drive your December 23rd payroll date. Some of those are legal requirements too, because of how many days' notice you have to give for open enrollment under the law.
You bet. And the team should be prepared to stand up and be counted for that.
That question, should be, we are.
And they should be able to tell you that they are ready several weeks in advance. Because they didn't say they were not ready until 1 week before 6/11.
And then my last one is dealing with the replan impact, and you have your organization listed on here as a potential increase in contract. Do you have the time available if this thing does slide potentially later and later and later?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not a constraint that we're, okay, thank you.
No. Oh, I didn't answer the other part of your question though.
I didn't ask about money.
But you asked about workforce management, which was,
Yes.
is there a drop dead date for that as well? And I would suggest to you that there is. I'm not sure what it is right now because they are several weeks late going into the project, which means that they are replanning as we speak, coming up with a new set of dates for when is system testing, integration system testing for workforce management supposed to start. That's your drop dead date for that one as well.
You said that was the only department that showed a downward red arrow, as I recall, on
Yes.
the target. That of all the places in the entire process, workforce management was the only one that showed a down red arrow.
Yep.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, I would like to
add identification of the date for the workforce management as an additional item that we want to see in the next monthly report. Ms. Simon?
Just, I have a question. While you're at these meetings discussing this with the stakeholders, everybody's got to be asking the questions that we're discussing here in this committee. What, if anything, is the response to this lack of timeliness, the testing? I mean, I heard it from the team itself that has the fiscal, that you identified that response, but it seems to me that there's no sense of urgency or concern over what's this going to cost us and what's being done to make sure this is timely.
I think the leadership of the team definitely is thinking along those lines. I think the team members are the ones that are very relieved for lack of pressure. But by the same token, they're also not informed as timely because sometimes the communication doesn't go filtering down to the team members as it should. So, sometimes there seems to be people are waiting for larger meetings and they make these big pronouncements. And, maybe they ought to just simply say, yesterday we talked about this and this is what's happening. Remember I was saying earlier, one of the conditions or concerns that I have is to make sure that the team gets into a weekly cycle. It needs to be running itself on a weekly cycle, and it doesn't. It has a tendency to stretch
Why
things.
is that? I see that's one of your projects to successfully conclude is to adhere to this weekly approach
Right.
and keeping the momentum. What's stopping this as far as you can tell from happening?
Okay, I was asked early on in the executive steering committee what was one of my observations about the project, and this is when I was after I had been here for 2 weeks, and I said one thing: project needs to maintain pace. Got to maintain pace. Well, the only way you can maintain pace is to get into this habit, and the habit is weekly rotations, which means that the activities that are assigned to people are weekly, which means that when you talk about is it done, you don't have to ever ask what part of it is done. All you ask is it done? And instead, we get things like, well, how are you doing on the scripts? We're 80% complete. And then when you dig, you find out, oh, we're 80% complete on all 300 of them, which means that none of them are done. But it's like if you have 5 interfaces that are necessary for getting ready for HR testing, 5 interfaces. I do not want to hear, it's meaningless to sit there and say, well, this is something that's going to take us 3 weeks and we're 20% done. I'm going, wait, there's 5 interfaces. Are you finished with the first one? 20% to me means the first one should be done. Oh no, all of them are 20%. You see what I'm saying? But if I have the list and I've got 5, then I can say, well, item 1 is due this week. Item 2 and 3 are due next week. Item 3 and 4 are doing the week following. You see, I'm into a week pattern, and then I'm into, is it done, is it not done? It's so much easier, because then you don't have to make any guesses about, people are how complete are you? Oh, I'm 50%. And all I want to know is if there's 100 of them, you better be done with 50. It's simple. That's all it takes.
Thank you. I just don't know why there's not a response. Is there different philosophy about this? Who's actually making these determinations not to do this?
There's no question there are philosophy differences.
Okay.
No question. Again, Infor isn't worried about those detail line items. They're worried about, I've got a deliverable and when you approve it, I get paid $500.
Yeah, they're going to get paid more the longer this goes. So there's no incentive from the, with whom we're getting this direction to do this type of correction.
Their incentive is to get the county to review and approve their deliverables. That's their incentive. Okay?
Okay, we're going to add to the next report, a report on what's the schedule review process. Is it a weekly process? If not, what is the process? And who determines and how do we determine whether the implementation is on track? Council President Brady, followed by Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank you, Zig, for your presentation. I think the kind of insight that you're providing us is exactly what we were looking for when we were looking for someone to do that. But I also just want to say that to the chairman that I appreciate the leadership that you're providing on this issue. It's very complicated. It's very difficult. We know that that's the case, and we want to be helpful in making this successful. And I want the administration to know what they already know, and that's that, you know, the leadership of the council, and I believe I speak for the council, are behind the council, the chairman of the finance committee, and the presentation that you're giving us. We're trying to communicate to the administration in a variety of ways, and this is one of them. And so please take what the chairman requests very seriously, because otherwise we have no way to move forward and be part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you for that support very much. Ms. Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly do agree, and thank you for what you've requested. I think that will benefit all of us. Appreciate that. Just two questions after all that's been said. I'm disappointed to hear that the project manager that we all were relieved to know was finally hired after quite a delay from the beginning till now is not a one and only project manager and is not overseeing the entire project. And we're back to what I thought I heard of working in silos. So what happened to the concept of hiring one person, having his resume, approving his hire, to now looking like we're back to compartmentalizing the project?
Well, an awful lot of that, I guess, can only be answered by the administration in terms of what their interpretation is of how things should be run. I think there is a thought that one of those individuals that was brought on is perfectly capable of literally being that single project manager, and that there is a thought that person would be moved into that slot. I don't know when. I think it would be an excellent move, as long as, and I think we all know that I think that the project ought to be run by non-IT as opposed to IT. But that probably will happen, I think. I just don't know when and how long it might take to get to that point. I think there's no question that there was a reaction with regard to the fiscal situation. I think this new individual, in my mind, probably would agree with me. In fact, was probably the instigator of an awful lot of these thoughts to say, wait a minute, what are we doing? We need to be ready for testing before we test. So I think, that person, would agree with some of the comments that I'm making, I think, without a doubt. But I think there's some focus right now of helping the fiscal group, of helping that portion. And I think that's understandable, that might be the case. And it's just a matter of, well, okay, maybe after we can get this thing solidified and get this thing replanned, maybe that's a moment in time when, okay, now let's move that person up. But we still probably need to go find somebody else to put in behind them and then have that person be the overall leader. So that could be a few weeks away.
Okay. My second question was on the project spend. The $25 million that was initially budgeted for this, on your page 39, you were suggesting a reclassified of services But I guess I'm just concerned that we're putting costs outside of the 25 million into another pot and calling it operating. How much money are we anticipating that the additional operating budget is going to be that was initially perhaps put in the 25 million that is being pulled out now, if I'm understanding, and called operating? There seems to be a gray area of what we call capital and what we call operating until we get finished with the capital, and then it becomes solely operating. So what kind of money are we looking at outside of the 25 million when we're ready to say we're done, it's operating, and now it's all operating costs?
Round numbers, I would estimate probably somewhere in the vicinity of 4 million.
If I may, so is that 4 million part of the 25 million that should have been included in that 25, but we're pulling it out now and calling it operating, even though we couldn't have possibly done this project without putting those operating costs in the capital?
I don't necessarily think so. I think you could have easily created a capital authorization of somewhere in the vicinity of 20 to 22 million rather than 25. Okay. The concept of having a contingency amount came up somewhere along the line 2 years ago, I don't know when. And I'm sitting there going, okay, you got a fixed fee contract with Infor, what's the contingency for? So you probably didn't need that. I mean, you probably could have gone with a capital authorization closer to 20 million. 20
So if I may, so my understanding that the actual capital costs were about 21 million, and that our operating costs will equal about 4, so we still come out with a $25 million total budget, or are we 25 with capital and another 4 afterwards?
With the changes that we just talked about today, you're gonna end up close to the 25 million capital, all in capital. I have asked several times to make sure that we are clear on, is the 25 million a capital authorization? And my understanding is a capital authorization, therefore no operating funds should be going into that number, okay? And so, yes, will you be spending more because of the system and, and so forth? Will you need resources? Absolutely. And, I've already suggested several times to IT that, you guys need to be putting together a budget change request for 2019. It's what you should be doing, because there's going to be a need for that. And remember that spike we had at the end of the year for software? That last month, there was this big spike. That's about $1.5 million.
Yeah.
Well, that's an annual number. But at some point, it becomes operating. At some point, you say, well, we're using the system. It's now part of the operating budget of IT.
So just for a little bit more clarification, so at the end of this project, when it's 25 million, we will expect probably to pay another 4 million, if all goes well, for back operating costs that were within the capital. It's not for the time that it takes for the project to be completed forward, but it's for past, that's going to be included in the capital.
No, it's for going forward. So if everything is, let's use the example, if everything finishes on 3/31/2019.
Yes.
The original budget that I was working with several months ago took software cost and literally included it for the entire year of 2019. It also included the salaries of employees for 2019, for the year.
Oh, okay.
Which is where I originally said, wait a minute, you turn the system on 3/31,
You're done.
you're done. That's not development work anymore. That's not capital project.
Right.
That is money spent day-to-day work.
Okay.
So it's going forward.
Good, thank you.
Okay, well, we've batted it around, we're out of time, and I reinforce what Ms. Baker said. We really need to have one person in charge, define what needs to be done. We need to have a system in place so that people can be held accountable to deliver the step-by-step elements and So I look forward to working with the administration by the end of this week on getting confirmation on the elements for the next report. So is there any miscellaneous business? Hearing none, there being no further business, we stand adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody.